This is a 16 days of activism video. I want to share a talk that I did for the WOW Festival in Durham earlier this year. I was invited to give a big idea, and I chose to focus on justice because that's been such a major theme of my career. And so this big idea is dedicated to all the people out there who are trying to create change, all the people who care a lot about justice. When I started my career and it brought me into close contact with the criminal justice system, I think it took me, about 5 minutes to realise there are some serious problems with this system. And I found that in a way like almost inspiring, because it was a situation where, gosh, the problem is just so big and you can see like so many ways in which it could be better. I felt like I had something, to offer as part of the mix. And so that's what I did. I got to work. I was delivering loads of training to police officers and barristers, ultimately judges. I was lucky. I got pretty good access to that system, and I met some really good people along the way. But the deeper I got into this idea of justice and the more I understood how those systems work, the more ambitious I got for change. Like, the changes I wanted to see just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And at the same time, I got to know the system a lot better, and I could just see that it's not really designed to change. Certainly not at a pace, that would satisfy the kind of ambition I had. So, as a change maker, I felt myself getting to this crossroads of realizing if I want to make my work about justice, and if I really want to know that it's making a difference, I might need to make some changes. Changes not to the system, but to myself. As an activist, I'd had all of my attention and all of my energy focused on the state, on this criminal justice system. It's like my gaze was fixed there. And I began to get curious. If I've been looking at this thing this whole time and giving this all of my energy, what have I failed to notice? What have I not seen? What hasn't had any of my energy? And that eventually led to this ultimate question, which was, what are the questions I've never asked? The questions we ask are really powerful. In fact, often the questions we ask say more about us than the answers we give, because questions curate our curiosity. They set the path, they set the course. And so I had a new question, and it sent me on a new path. Given that our systems fail to deliver justice on so many different levels, how are all of those people who either chose never to report or did report but they're not living with a sense of justice, how are all of those people living with injustice? What is that like? How are they coping? And maybe most importantly, can they be helped? The backdrop for this whole moment in my career was actually lockdown. And during lockdown, we'd started holding Circle as a way of supporting rape crisis teams. If you haven't heard of Circle before, it's this really beautiful way of gathering in a group and making space to listen, to be seen, to be heard, to connect. And we really wanted to offer some support to rape crisis centres. So we'd been doing that, and then we began to hold Circle online, inviting people with lived experience of any kind of sexual harm to join and participate in a conversation about healing from injustice or living from injustice. As a researcher, the circles that we held were like the most beautiful version of data collection I've ever been involved in. We wanted to know what it felt like to live with injustice, what justice might mean to people who've been let down by systems. And I have to say, as an activist, it felt really powerful to be deeply involved in justice in a way that had nothing to do with the state. Lockdown ended. What did you do after lockdown? That moment where everybody was trying to get back to normal. Cynthia and I had the opposite response. We wanted to be changed. We didn't want normal. We wanted to get out. We wanted to be changed by that whole experience. And so we put our belongings in storage, gave notice on our flat, got a van, and we ended up traveling the UK for what was 18 months. And whilst we were traveling, we visited rape crisis centres, domestic violence refuges, and we held circle asking people about healing from injustice. We knew that we wanted these circles to have a purpose, and a year after we had left our home and been traveling, we actually held our first healing from injustice ceremony. In the circles, we'd noticed that some people were benefiting simply from that process. They weren't designed as a healing process. They were designed as a learning process. But people seemed to be benefiting from gathering in a group and talking about justice. So we took that one step further and created a really simple rite of passage, a way of showing up for yourself and a way of showing up for others. Our ceremonies are really simple. I honestly believe that everyone just showing up with a shared understanding of, why we're all here is 99% of the magic. But what we do is we have a physical space and we take people to 4 different areas. We start by acknowledging the burden that comes with living with injustice, acknowledging the things that people have to carry with them, if that's their path. Then we move to a space that's dedicated to anger, because anger came up as such a central theme when we held our circles. The third space that we visit is grief. I think that so much of this work is about loss. And just as with any other kind of grief, it can really help to make a public space where we can spend time in our individual and collective grief. And then finally we go to justice, and we use that space to redefine what justice can mean for us as individuals and also collectively. One of my favourite bits of the ceremony is we then give people time, and part of the time is you can write anything you want on a piece of paper, and we end the ceremony with a fire, putting into the flames the things that need to be transformed, the things that maybe need to be destroyed. Our journey brought us to Scotland, to Pitlochry, and this is where we hold our public ceremonies in the summer. You're invited. We've had people come to the ceremonies for themselves to acknowledge their own pain. We've had parents, children, partners, friends of people who've experienced abuse coming to recognise the pain of the person they love, but also to heal from the sense of injustice they're holding themselves. And we've had people show up to the ceremonies just because they wanted to do something positive about this topic area. So they were happy to show up, to bear witness, to add their voice to the flame. And we've also had a lot of people who work in the space coming to acknowledge the burden and the blessing that comes with doing this work. This is some of what I've learned about justice. Justice comes in as many shapes and sizes as injustice. It doesn't belong to one area of government, to one institution, or to any one group of people. Justice belongs to all of us. It's something that we're able to give to each other in simple, everyday moments. It can happen in a conversation. It can be in a gesture. There is justice in words and justice in silence. I've also learnt that justice can be contagious. My justice can become your justice. It's free and it's dynamic and it thrives in relationships. This story is one example of what can happen when we step back, when we're brave enough to let go, when we're bold enough to ask different questions, when we look for the power at our fingertips that we've been ignoring. So for the change makers watching, where is your attention placed? What is taking all of your energy? What questions are you asking? And most importantly, what questions have you never asked?